Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. Let's start in Beijing because the leadership drama inside China's military just got more concrete. Yesterday, we talked about Xi Jinping gutting the PLA's senior ranks, and now we've got clearer confirmation that this wasn't a limited cleanup. It's a full structural reset. Over the weekend and into Monday, Beijing formally removed General Zhang Yuxia and Joint Chief of Staff Liu Zhenli, two of the most senior uniformed officers in the system. Zhang wasn't just any general. He was the top uniformed voice on the Central Military Commission and one of the only people left in the PLA with actual combat experience, dating back to the Vietnam War in the late 1970s. He was also a longtime Xi confidant, which makes this all the more telling. Official language sticks to the usual serious violations of discipline and law. But what's different this time is that state media explicitly framed this as a legal issue, not just party discipline. That's a notch up. And quietly, the military paper accused the purged generals of undermining the chairmanship system, Xi's personal control mechanism over the armed forces. Translation: this wasn't just about money or corruption, it was about loyalty and authority. Since Xi took power in 2012, more than 110 generals have been purged. But this wave hits closer to the core because many of these officers were personally promoted by Xi himself. That's not house cleaning. That's ripping out load-bearing beams. Now, overlay that with what's happening around Taiwan, and the timing matters. Taiwan released updated figures showing Chinese military flights near the island hit more than 5,700 sorties in 2025. 5 years ago, that number was under 400. This isn't a spike anymore, it's the baseline. What used to be treated as a crisis response has become routine pressure. PLA aircraft are operating in and around Taiwan's air defense identification zone so frequently that Taiwan's Air Force is essentially on permanent overtime. These flights are paired with exercises that look increasingly rehearsed rather than demonstrative. Joint air and naval drills, simulated blockades, and precision strike scenarios. Some of those activities pushed right up against Taiwan's territorial baselines. Beijing, as always, says everything is lawful. Taipei calls it gray zone warfare. Both sides know exactly what game is being played. Inside Taiwan, the politics are getting messier, and this is a bit of an update from what we were tracking earlier. President Lai Ching-te came out this week emphasizing that Taiwan's economic future runs through democratic partners, not China. He highlighted recent talks with the U.S. covering AI, drones, and critical minerals, and pointed to new cooperation frameworks around economic security and semiconductor supply chains. That messaging landed at an awkward moment, because at the same time, senior figures from Taiwan's opposition Kuomintang were in Beijing for non-political exchanges. We've seen that play before, and it usually ends with Beijing smiling for photos while filing leverage for later. What sharpened the issue was Taiwan's legislature blocking Lai's proposed $40 billion defense budget. This drew a very public rebuke from U.S. Senator Roger Wicker, who warned Taiwan was delaying urgently needed weapons at a time of rising Chinese pressure. The opposition pushed back, arguing they weren't going to approve a long-term blank check without more detail. Meanwhile, the PLA keeps flying, Xi keeps purging, and the clock keeps ticking. Zooming out to the wider strategic picture, Russia decided to contribute its own brand of chaos. On Tuesday, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said Moscow is ready for a world without nuclear arms limits as the New START treaty expires later this week. No replacement lined up, no framework waiting in the wings, just a shrug and a statement that the lack of an answer is also an answer. Ryabkov made those remarks while in Beijing, by the way, and explicitly said Russia supports China's position on arms control. He also warned that if the U.S. expands missile defense deployments, specifically mentioning places like Greenland, Russia would take compensatory measures. That phrase has been doing a lot of work in Moscow lately. If this all feels like Cold War déjà vu, that's because it is, just with worse discipline and more social media posts. On the economic front, the U.S. is clearly treating competition with China as a long-haul event. President Trump announced a $12 billion initiative called Project Vault to create a U.S. strategic critical minerals reserve. Think Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but for rare earths, magnets, and the inputs that actually keep modern economies and militaries functioning. This comes after China restricted magnet exports last year, which caused immediate supply headaches across multiple industries. This isn't theoretical. The reserve is backed by export-import bank financing and private capital, with companies like Boeing, GM, and Google involved. The goal is straightforward: reduce vulnerability to Chinese choke points and insulate U.S. manufacturers from supply shocks. Alongside that, the administration is leaning harder on forced labor enforcement, especially tied to mineral extraction and processing in Xinjiang. The message is clear: economic security is national security now, full stop. China, for its part, appears to be hedging. Beijing has been steadily buying gold while reducing reported holdings of U.S. treasuries to their lowest levels since 2008. And then reality bit at home. Over the weekend, a retail gold trading platform in Shenzhen collapsed, freezing more than $1 billion worth of withdrawals. Thousands of ordinary investors rushed into gold as prices surged, only to find the exits locked. The state quietly accumulates bullion while regular citizens get burned chasing the same hedge. That's not a great look, but it is a very on-brand one. Internally, Beijing is also making examples. On Monday, China confirmed the execution of 4 leaders of a Myanmar-based telecom fraud syndicate tied to massive scam operations and multiple deaths. This followed similar executions just days earlier involving another criminal group. These weren't symbolic sentences. They were very real, very final. At the same time, former Justice Minister Tang Yijun was sentenced to life in prison for taking nearly $20 million in bribes over more than a decade. He'd quietly failed to make the Communist Party's Central Committee back in 2022, which in hindsight looks like the warning flare. Externally, China continues expanding influence without putting boots on the ground. Over the past 2 decades, Chinese law enforcement agencies have trained security forces in dozens of countries, focusing on crowd control, protest suppression, and VIP protection. It's security as a service, aimed squarely at regime stability. No alliances, no defense treaties, just tools to keep streets quiet and leaders safe. So where does that leave us? China is purging its generals while pressing Taiwan. Russia is discarding nuclear guardrails. The U.S. is stockpiling minerals like it's planning for a long winter. And everyone seems to be acting on the assumption that the old rules either don't apply anymore or won't for much longer. Thanks for listening and being part of the RH community. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. If you want to see some changes, email us at info@restrictedhandling.com. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.